as many times as I ever cared to imagine. I grew up as a commercial fisherman. I'm supposed to be fishing. I'm not supposed to be doing this. But I guess I'm a fisher of men.
Amen.
Now, after the trial lasted, I went to one of the most notorious prisons in the United States, in Baltimore City, the Maryland Penitentiary at 954 4th Street, where just 2 weeks before I got there, a guard had been disemboweled. This is where I was at, accused and branded the worst thing possible, a child killer. I stepped off that bus in handcuffs and shackles and waist chain and took those little tiny steps you have to take. That 300-some-pound door slammed shut on my life, and I could touch either wall by going like this. I could take 3 steps and be to the front, from the back of the cell. But this was my place. A stainless steel toilet sits there in a rack. I have a kindred spirit with this photograph of this man standing to my left. Unique. But it's not unique to 130 other 8 former death row inmates who have been exonerated by other means. Only 17 of those have been DNA exonerations. I thought my life was over. I've seen people get so mortified and so caught up in this place that I call home now, because this was my life. Death row. I've seen them get so caught up in it that they would take 2 number 2 pencils and shove them right through their eyes because they didn't want to see it anymore. They didn't want to feel it anymore. Hung themselves or took drugs and just went off. And people, it was a horrible place to be. But this was my life. I started reading every book I could possibly think of to figure out a way to get back in court. I was an innocent man, so that meant to me that the real killer was still out there. I had to go find out who the 6'5", curly blonde hair man was and get freedom for me, but not just for me, for Dawn Hamilton. Like Benita sitting over here. The victims. All this is etches right against us. The judge didn't take no time to sentence me to death. And that's what it was. My case was overturned in 1986 by a piece of law called Brady information. This means that the police department, the prosecutors in this case, in Baltimore County, this is where the case was tried, withheld information about another suspect. Actually, they withheld a lot of things. We can't withhold the truth anymore. In an adversarial system, it cannot be adversarial against the truth. But this was my life, and I went through a new trial, and everybody come back and point me out 5 identification witnesses, and all that's the guy. There he is, the barns right there. That's the guy. That's him. That's all of us. One right after the other. They held a lineup on a Monday. I was arrested on a Thursday. And they told all the witnesses in the case not to watch TV. He said, don't watch TV because you arrested a suspect. And by the way, his name is Kirk Bloodsworth. I wonder if they should have left that part. My life was indeed over. The court rendered me guilty again, and I went back to prison, an innocent man. I went through so many different trials and tribulations in this place. I had nowhere to go, nowhere to be. I just was. I had nothing to do. I just would read and try to figure out what was wrong. I read every book from Stephen King to Gestalt psychology and tried to find some peace in this world. The Bible, the Quran, everything I could think of to get closer to some spiritual meaning for all this. And nothing came but was sitting in my cell, and the priest sent down 2 officers to talk to me. And this was in 1993. I had already submitted for a DNA test, dioxyribonucleic acid. I was the first one from a capital conviction to ever submit such a test. I didn't know that at the time. I really didn't care about that accolade. I just wanted to get my freedom. The priest was sitting there in the little room, and the lady friend had come to see me every week from the church was sitting there, and we were both weeping. And I knew something had happened. My mother passed away. She died just 5 months before the real truth came out. I had to go to see her in handcuffs and shackles and kiss her goodbye and go back to that place I called home, my life. But my mother was the reason I could read the book that found out the truth in my case. And she used to tell me, and I was crying, and the priest was talking to me, Kirk, don't despair. And all of a sudden I heard my mother. She was about this tall. And she always looked up to me and said, "That's unbelievable, you're my son." But she taught me how to read, and she used to say things like, stand up for something, or you'll fall for anything. And stand up for your friends. Just stand up. And I was in this van, I was going back to Jessup to go back to this cell, and I hear my mother's voice resonate, just like my voice is resonating through this hall, through this church. Stand up, and it got louder, and I could hear my mother's voice, and it said stand up, and it got louder. By the time I got back to the Jessup Annex where I was staying at the cut, I was literally off the floor, straining against the chains with this grin on my face and tears streaming down my face. Because I also remember the last thing I could remember was my mother said, right is light. I knew that the truth in my life was coming back. On June 28, 1993, the DNA results came back, and I was 100% excluded as the person responsible for Dawn Hamilton's murder. But that life was short-lived, because when I got out, the prosecutors in this case said, well, if we had DNA evidence in 1984, we wouldn't have prosecuted Mr. Bloodsworth, but we're not prepared to say he's innocent. What is wrong with these people? I have no idea, but I kept pushing, and every time I talk about the case, and I'd go in front of Congress, and I speak in front of Congress about this thing called the Innocent Protection Act, and then this DNA testing program that's now called the Kirk Bloodsworth Post-Conviction DNA Testing Program, try to help men that have DNA, but we don't have no DNA all the time. Out of the 138 people that have been exonerated, 17 of them are DNA exonerations. We have to have other means. Like 7 witnesses recanting a testimony about killing 9 people. We don't have it. We're not going to take care of that. You can't kill man because you have that little bit that's changed. It's all changed. Everybody's telling something else. It's a story. Like Malcolm X said, we've been hoodwinked. We've been very hoodwinked. And it's got to change. I pushed and pushed and pushed to get the DNA test done in Dawn Hamilton's case, and guess what? They were so interested in solving this crime. When I called them, I said, look, I got this new thing, it's called CODIS. It's a DNA database where you have all these people. It's a national database, a state database, and it was all combined with all these different things. And I said, let's submit the test. We don't have the money, Mr. Bloodsworth. I said, well, how much can it be? I'll pay for it. I don't care. He said, well, you can't do that, Mr. Bloodsworth. You're still a suspect. That would be unethical. Really? Now, the date I was released in 1993, did they get it in 1994 when I was pardoned and got $300,000 for my trouble? That's $3.50 an hour or more, maybe a couple pennies. Did he test the evidence in 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, the fall of that year? They finally submitted the DNA in Dawn Hamilton's murder case, 10 years later. I was sitting in my office and the phone rang, and it was right on the caller ID. It said, Baltimore County Government. I thought the last time I talked to them, it didn't turn out too well. When I answered the phone, it was the same shrill voice I heard in 2 murder trials calling me a monster. Saying, don't be fooled by the monster that sits in that chair. It's in the eyes. Remember what the witnesses said about the eyes. They had a man that identified me on TV that they called a credible witness and let him come to the line. So this voice, this woman, it was Ann Brooks, the prosecuting attorney that called me a monster, was on the other line. I said, Mr. Bloodsworth, I want to talk to you, and I'll meet you anywhere in the state. We have an update on the Hamilton murder case, but I can't tell you over the telephone. So I met her at the Burger King in Cambridge. And she sat there and told me that they had a cold hit in the CODIS database of the real killer of Dawn Hamilton. And guess what? He was not 6'5". He was 5'6", 160 pounds. And he lived right down the tier from me for 5 years. It's a tragedy that we live in this world when on flimsy evidence, weak as water, we cannot execute a man. Kimberly Shea Ruffin pled guilty to Dawn Hamilton's murder. He got life in prison because I told the prosecutors in this case, Mr. Bloodsworth, what do you want us to do? You got the death penalty for this. And I said no. Because he's not going nowhere. He is not going to place. He's stuck in a room he's never going to get out of, and his sentence don't even start until after he finishes his 45-year sentence he got in for trying to rape another woman in Fells Point. He was originally released 2 weeks before Dawn Hamilton's murder for 2 attempted rapes of 2 little girls in the Baltimore area and slipped through the cracks. He pled guilty to avoid the death penalty, and I did not stop because now he can hold himself accountable for what he's done. It's not that we don't want to punish these folks, we just can't take their life anymore. Because if you do that, you're going to kill me or Troy Davis. So I'm telling each and every one of you, as you sit here today and look at me, you're looking at Troy Davis. You're looking at Troy Davis as you turn around and look at each and every one of yourselves, and when you look in the mirror, you're Troy Davis. You cannot stop this. We need to stop this execution and the death penalty in the United States. It is imperative, and this execution must be halted. I wrote a letter to the governor a long time ago when Troy's case first came out, and I